who's going to kind of give us a kickoff of the beautiful Santa Lucia Highlands.
Yeah, so as we go through these slides here, I think you'll get a better sense of the SLH. And first of all, welcome everybody. Thank you for attending. I hope you leave this session with a little bit more knowledge of our wonderful growing area, the Santa Lucia Highlands. You know, this slide that we're looking at here kind of shows the proximity in California. We're north central coast. We're, you know, about 2 hours south of San Francisco and about an hour and a half north of Paso Robles. And we're what this doesn't show real well is the big Monterey Bay, which has Santa Cruz to the north and Santa Cruz at the southern end. This shows kind of the southern end of the bay there with Monterey and Carmel, and then we have the wonderful Big Sur coast right down. You know, actually it's right over the hills from us, from the SLH, is Big Sur. So wonderful place. What this doesn't show is that there's a very deep canyon of water out in Monterey Bay that comes right into shore. It's deeper than the Grand Canyon. It's a big well of really cold water. And that's our air conditioner for the SLH. Actually, between the Santa Lucia Highlands and the Bay, it's actually too cool to grow grapes in there adequately. They won't ripen completely. And so we're a very cool area. If you've been to San Francisco in the summertime, you'll, you know, if you've been caught in the cold fog in San Francisco in the month of August or something like that and froze your butt off, that's us. We are very much have the same type of marine weather that San Francisco does. So that's part of our terroir of our appellation is that coolness, and along with wind and refrigerated sunlight and a few other things. Wendy, I think there's a slide, or Gwen, there's a slide with the acreages on there. We have about 59, almost 6,000 acres planted. Pinot Noir is the king. Chardonnay is second. Both those grapes, you know, excel there. You know, we can't grow Pinot Noir. I mean, we can't grow Cabernet. We can't grow Zinfandel. We just don't have the heat. But the grapes that do grow there excel. Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Syrah does very good. Riesling, I'm going to highlight Riesling later on, and you know, all the cooler climate Alsatian type grapes and things like that do very well in this appellation, even though there's not a lot of them planted. You know, Pinot Noir is so popular right now that that's kind of been the focus of our growers lately because of how well it does. So yeah. What this slide I hopefully wants to point out is that we are all hillsides. It doesn't show that we're actually lifted off the valley floor. The valley floor is all the soils down there were laid down by the Salinas River, very fertile. That's where all our row crops, our celery, our lettuce, our broccoli, and everything in Monterey grows down on the floor. We're on the hillside, so all our vineyards in SLH are sloped up the hill, and they're up off the valley floor. All the soils were washed out of the hills, and so they're very gravelly, rocky, well drained, and perfect soils for grapes. So that's one of the reasons why the SLH fruit does very, very well. Here's some of the elevation I mentioned. The elevation change gets more dramatic as you go from the ocean back. You get your steeper slopes and your higher elevations. We're all 5 to 20%. We're alluvial fan soil situations, granitic based soils, gravelly, very deep well drained. Unlike other areas, you can go down 30 feet, not hit any hard pan. And so it lets our roots and our vines reach out and mine those soils for minerals and things like that. So a big part of why the quality is so high in our area. Yeah, so you know, the missions of the Junipero Serranas group, started brought plantings up from Mexico, and when they started exploring California. But really in the 70s, we had some of our first commercial people. Winty was one of the first, the Mirsu family, Nicky Hahn, Rich Smith, and some of the other people in the Highlands. A lot of vineyards established by investors that weren't really connected with wineries early on, and then as times went on, we became a little bit more family-based growers. And 80s and 90s, we had Vintana, Vintana's in the SLH, but we had ourselves at Morgan and Mare Soleil and others start putting vineyards in, and more Steve Mack and the Gary Franchione and his group put their wineries. They started wineries eventually, and so we are where we are now, and we're kind of more, not so much corporate based anymore, but more family based in our groupings. And the AVA actually came about in 91, 92. And it was formed back then. We're right next to Arroyo Seco, and so that's when we officially became an appellation. And then today we are what we are. We've been growing a lot, and we are, presently our group, and Wendy, Glenn is the leader of the group right now, and she's doing a great job. This shows some of our hillside situations. Usually there's a lot of times you'll see down on the left, you'll see that brown soil, that's river bottom soil. And then usually there's I think that's River Road there right next to the bottom of the cliff. And then there's usually a cliff of some sort, and then all our vineyards are on top of the hills there, and then go up the slopes, and not a real steep, but a gradual, 8 to 12% slopes going up the hill and stuff like that. Here's some of our individual wineries, some great shots. Some fog just burning off. Fog is kind of a typical day. We start off with the fog in the morning, burns off. We get some cool sunlight for a while, and then the winds start in off the Monterey Bay and cool us back down again. And the wind is kind of the latest part of our terroir that people are really finding out about, because the wind, along with the fog and the coolness of our area, very much is part of the terroir, toughens our skins up on the grapes. And wine flavors come from skins, so you have thicker skins, you have better flavored wines. There's some nice vineyard shots of the lower part. Those are the Gabilan Mountains across the other side of the valley, and that frames the Salinas Valley there, and it's just a big wind tunnel coming off the Monterey coast of cool winds whipping down there every day. Some more, some of the people have eked out little hilltops to put a little vineyard on, and beautiful scenery. Here's some of our vineyard properties. We have a wonderful map that shows all the vineyards on our website, and please visit our website. It's very Well, lots of stuff on there. Here's the bay. We're talking about the cool waters off the bays, our air conditioning. That's why we're cool.
Dan, thank you so much for this this intro. We're gonna now welcome Steve, who's gonna talk a little bit more about the specifics of the climate and how specifically it matters to the grape and what ends up in the wines, the flavors that you end up in the wine. So we'll go over to Steve now.
Great, Gwen, thank you very much. And thanks, Dan, for warming us up. Appreciate it. So as Dan mentioned, the maritime influence here in the Salinas Valley is really paramount to our climate and influencing our climate. And so many of the things, next slide, please, that influence wine quality. In terms of climate, we've got fog, we got wind, we got lack of rain here in the Salinas Valley, and I'll get into that. And it moderates the temperatures. That's what I would call terroir. My definition of terroir is everything we can't control. And I want to point out that the Salinas Valley is 250,000 irrigated acres of agriculture, and it's quite sustainable. And I won't get into that, it's a whole nother talk, but the fact that it can grow 50 different types of crops and is from the ocean to Paso Robles is about almost 100 miles of farmland, and it's quite dynamic. You know, we have a marine sanctuary out there in the Monterey Bay. There are many of us who maintain that we ought to have an agricultural sanctuary to protect this strategic jewel, if you would. So the submarine canyon Dan talked about, there's 300 cubic miles of cold, deep water out there. And so let's get into the next slide and we can talk about specifics. So the wind is famous. I grew up in a coastal climate. When I moved to the Salinas Valley 36 years ago, you know, people said, oh, you know, the wind. I said, no, you know, it's a sea breeze. Well, it's not a sea breeze. And if you're in Soledad someday, at the Shell station, and you open both doors, you'll understand why when the contents of your pickup truck ends up down the next city down. It is a truly a gusty and a windy situation, and it's like clockwork. Every day at 1 o'clock, maybe 2 o'clock, it starts up and it blows well into the morning. So we do all of our fungicide work at night or in the very early mornings before noon. As the slide says, there's lots of influence as a result of the wind. I'm not going to read through those, but I will say that the wind is a ground effect wind. And the reason that's important, if we have any pilots in the audience, if you take off from the city of Salinas and the wind's blowing 25 miles an hour off the ocean, you could get up to an altitude of 1,500 feet and the wind could completely switch direction and be blowing the opposite direction, or not blowing at all. And why that's important is as you climb up the slopes of the Santa Lucia Highlands to some of the higher elevation vineyards, you actually will gain some temperature and you'll have a lot less wind. So that's very important and unique to the wind itself. And it also helps form an inversion layer, which right now, many of us are praying continues to keep the smoke above the elevation of the vineyards. Next slide, please. So the fog, Dan talked about the fog. And, you know, what I like to tell people is that are first-time visitors, bring a sweatshirt, as you mentioned. It's one of the best-selling items in our tasting room when people get off the plane. It's normally 3 to 5 days of fog and then 3 to 5 days of heat, except for when we get into what we call June gloom, which if you're in Carmel, the record, I believe, is 31 days without seeing the sun. So there are those occasions when the fog lingers, but that's with climate change, it seems like that's less and less the case. When we do get heat events like we're currently going through, most of us are hoping that air conditioner or the refrigerator kicks in and we get the fog as soon as possible. Next slide, please. So the climate, you know, it's a semi-arid climate, 10 to 14 inches of rain per year, little or no rain at harvest. And the reason that's the case is the Santa Lucia Highlands mountains, of course, go all the way to the Pacific Ocean. there's some 6,000, 5,000, almost 6,000 foot peaks out there. So you have a really significant increase in altitude from sea level to the top of those peaks in a very short distance. The only place that on the Pacific coast where that's greater is Alaska and Patagonia. So when the storms come in off of the ocean, they rise and they dump because now the clouds are more saturated with rain, and they dump most of the water in the Santa Lucias, which flow to a couple of lakes and then ultimately down our two rivers to recharge our system with water. Now, once they come over the Santa Lucia Highlands, they lower in elevation, and now they're not saturated, so they don't rain. And that's really important at harvest. If I had to look for another place to grow grapes in the world, I would definitely look for something, when we're talking about climate change, where you have this kind of geographical situation that keeps the rain away at harvest. It's really, really nice not to be, Oregon can't say that. Now in Europe, of course, you've got irrigation because you have a lot more rainfall. Here, we pretty much are rain-free from, let's say, April through September, sometimes October. So we can control the stress in our vines, unlike some appellations where it does rain during the growing season, and you've got your full field capacity soils that you have to deal with, and the shoots take off and start growing, and you're not getting the kind of stress you want to get the consistent wine quality year in and year out. Next slide. So temperatures. The vine and fruit development are tightly linked to temperature and duration. I would add that word as well. Consistency is super important. It's a hallmark of a great wine growing region. And Dan talked about Pinot Noir and Chardonnay varieties and Syrah that thrive. Next slide, please. So temperature consistency. There's a lot of data.
Uh-oh, it looks like Steve is frozen up on us. Let's see if we can get him back. I had a feeling this could happen, right? Okay, well, I'll text him and we'll meanwhile kind of continue here. The point that that he's trying to get across here is that the climate in this region particularly, what you have is fruit development happening at a different rate of speed than sugar development. And these things are really important and play a very, very significant role in the flavors of the grapes that we get here from the Santa Lucia Highlands. This is the stuff I really wish Steve were on here because he explains it much better. Dan, do you want to jump in and take this one? Gotta unmute you.
Yeah, okay, I'm unmuted. Yeah, so, sugar development and flavor development follow a little bit different temperature track. And so you can get quick, sugar development happens a little quicker in warmer areas and things like that. But when you have kind of extremes in hot and cold, it kind of, the sugars can go up, but flavor development needs a little bit more moderate temperatures. And the Santa Lucia Highlands has those consistent moderate temperatures. So there's flavor development going on all the time. Plus, with our extended growing season, because we're so cool, we have a delayed harvest. We start harvesting 2 to 3 or 4 weeks behind, later than a lot of areas. That flavor development continues to just perk along. And that's another reason why the SLH has very flavorful wines. And yeah, so sugar, yeah, photosynthesis, flavor, yeah. So next slide, please. Okay, so you can kind of see some other growing areas that contrast. So we don't get quite as cool in the evening, but we don't get as warm during the day as some areas. So we have that little bit more moderate temperature throughout the whole growing season. Yeah, so our bud break is perhaps because we have moderate winters, we're probably a little bit earlier bud break than other areas. But because we're so cool and windy and so on, so through the harvest season, we have a later harvest. So it allows more time for flavor development developed in our fruit because of of our extended growing season. Next slide, I think, yeah. Okay, here's a nice shot of Sleepy Hollow.
But what I think we're going to do now is stop and see if anybody has any questions real quick. Hopefully Steve will jump back on, but anything so far that anybody wants to ask about, please feel free to chime in.
I have a quick question. How long is harvest usually for you all, considering the fog and you don't get a lot of sun? Like, how long is it typically, just on average?
Typically, it's a very short harvest. It's 4 weeks long. More often, it's 5 to 6 weeks long. That's very typical. Sometimes, depending on what's happening through the season, it cools off. Sometimes our Syrahs are usually the very last thing to come in. And so sometimes the harvest could go up to as long as 8 weeks or so. But I think that there might be some stuff that starts early and then it reaches a crescendo and then it tapers off. And then there's bits and pieces at the very end that, but that crescendo, that peak period of harvest is probably only about 4, maybe 5 weeks. And then you have the tagglers, what we call for some reason, some vineyard just as late in harvesting, you got to be patient with it.
And with that being, the harvest is so short, what would be the typical bricks that an average, if you know that I'm thinking of Syrah primarily.
Syrah primarily, probably 24, 25 bricks typically, but it depends on the winemaker's style. It could be 22, it could be 26, depending on his preference. It's all a matter of what the winery style is, and not so much what it just happens to be. They're watching the vineyard development, and they pick and choose what bricks and at what time they want to pick out. What's nice is that our season, it doesn't usually, if it's a normal harvest season, there's no heat spike or anything like that. We have kind of like lots of days to kind of decide on. It's like, I think this is close, but 2 more days, and so it's not real crazy most of the time. But there are some years when we have a lot of heat and stuff, and everything kind of gets pushed together a little bit. But typically, that's not the case.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, then I'm going to turn it over to Mark Pisoni. Mark's going to give us another kind of aspect. So he's a real farmer. He's out in the vineyards every single day and in the row crop farming business. So Mark's going to give us another perspective here.
Yes, I'm a real farmer. I spend all my time, you're chuckling, I spend all my time out in the ranch, and I absolutely love farming. I love being part of a farming community. I love being out in the ranch. I love producing fantastic wines that we can share with people. And it's just one of the highlights of my life, being part of that. And it's cool that you guys care so much about our vineyards, our area, and what we're doing, that you want to learn about it, because I love sharing what we're doing. I'm super proud of our area. And, you know, Zoom is cool, but if any of you ever want to come visit me on our ranch or visit the appellation on the ranch, please send Gwen a note and she'll get you in contact. And I would love to put you out to the vineyard, and I'll even put you out to work for a little bit. And you can see that beautiful scenery out there in the vineyards. I want to talk about the people of the appellation a little bit, because the people are really important, and it's something unique to our area. We have multiple multi-generational farming families that are really connected to the ranches and to the soils. Our family is one of them. I mean, in the early 1900s, our family had dairy cattle in the valley floor. Around World War II, we transitioned, began growing vegetables in the valley floor. And then in 1982, my dad went up into the mountains and began planting wine grapes. And it's these type of generational farming families that are so an integral part of our appellation. And I think it really, that long-term farming commitment is truly special about our area. And that love, I mean, absolute love for these ranches and these farms and what we're producing. And I look at not just our family, but I look at the Caracciolis. I look at Gary Francione and his kids, been here multiple generations. I look at Ray Francione. I look at the Wagners as well in our area. I mean, I can think about, you know, Steve Mack and his daughter, Kristen, Kirk Williams and Corey Williams. I mean, there's multiple families, the Buchanogans, I can think in this area that, you know, they live in these vineyards. They're on River Road all the time, and they're out on these ranches, and they really love taking care of the properties. And, you know, we're out there. And I think that's special about these, vineyards and this group of gals and guys out here producing fantastic wines, which is pretty cool about that. So, you know, the people behind it. Gwen also wanted me to touch a little bit on this growing season as well. This season, as Steve and Dan mentioned, we're a very dry appellation. We get only 10 to 14 inches of rain a year. This year we had decent rain in March, so late season rains, which gave our vines a lot of energy, a lot of vigor, and we started growing really well, really uniform, really even start to the season, which is cool. May rolled around with flowering. We got a pretty good set. Cluster weights were maybe slightly above normal. So as a result, we had to go out there and drop quite a bit of fruit on the ground. I mean, we're really focused on quality and making the very best wines we can. So fruit thinning is an important farming practice that our family does, and many families in the area does as well. And then we rolled through June and July, very uneventful, very traditional weather, you know, foggy in the morning, really wet, drippy fog. And then you get a couple hours of nice weather. And then we have that wind that just is a vicious wind that whips through this area. And like Steve said, if you're not from here, it is shocking how windy it is. I mean, every afternoon it's up to 20 miles an hour, and it's just, you have to be here to experience it, which is cool. And really rolled through, and the only real eventful has been the last week or so, where we've gotten some warm weather that's kind of brought on some grapes. So we're starting to see some sparkling wine produced in the area. We have a couple people that do sparkling wine in our appellation, which is pretty exciting, and exciting to see the beginning signs of harvest. So you're starting to see some sparkling wine producers beginning picking Pinot Noirs and Chardonnays. It'll be another couple of weeks before Chardonnay and Pinot Noir get started in this appellation. I mean, I'm excited. As farmers, we're eternal optimists. We're always looking forward to the upcoming vintage. And there's this excitement and there's this energy that comes about every year. And it's cool to be a part of that. And it's cool to be creating truly special wines that we get to share with people. And it's cool that you guys are out there learning about our appellation to want to share them with other people as well.
Thanks, Mark. One of the other things I get a lot of questions about from people is what's happening in the wineries and in the vineyards with the pandemic around us. And I was wondering if you could just take a few minutes to talk about what kinds of things you're doing for your vineyard workers and what you're planning for harvest when there's a lot of action and a pandemic.
Yeah, great question, Gwen. And, you know, keeping our team healthy is top of mind. And it's something that I've spent a ton of time on this year. I mean, just like any of you, I mean, our lives have been thrown upside down. And really, it's put an increased focus, I think, on agriculture, and our team of guys and gals out there, which anything that brings more attention to farmers and our farm workers and our farm communities is fantastic, and I love. And unfortunate, people sometimes have to see empty grocery stores, produce aisles to think like, hey, I got to think about the farmer, where this comes from, and make sure they're doing what they can to be safe. So us as a farming community, a couple things. One, I mean, masks. We're all masked up very quickly in the pandemic. Fortunately, keeping 6 feet of space is relatively easy out in the vineyards. Most vineyard rows are either 6 feet or 8 feet apart. So teams, we had to spread out a little bit more and put one person per row. So spread out, and that's been relatively easy to do that. You know, the harder things for us has been teaching people like, hey, you know, your carpool, let's break up carpools a little bit and encourage people to drive on their own. There's been a great deal of education that we've done. On our team, we have bi-weekly training sessions where we spend maybe a half hour talking to our team about what is going on in the community with coronavirus, what they can do to keep themselves and their families safe as well. We as a grower group also work with a local grower shipper group to develop priority testing for our workers. We teamed up with a Clínica de Salud in La Valle de Salinas, which is a local clinic, to help us get appointments for our teams. If people are concerned and want to get tested, get appointments to get tested and quickly get results back, which is just as important also. You know, we work with our local hospitals also and have brought hospital staff out to train our employees also to keep them safe and their families. And also, we even got recognized by Governor Newsom. Our grower shipper group began developing a housing quarantine model to help families and people that wanted to get into a safe, comfortable spot to be quarantined and provide housing for them. I mean, there's a number of things we're doing as growers, trying to keep our team healthy. And it's increased the focus on our employees. And, you know, the guys and gals that we work with, they're some of my best friends. I've been with them for years. And they've worked with my parents and my grandparents. And I mean, these are long-term committed families. I want to make sure we're taking care of them. And they're helping us produce fantastic wines that we get to share with you guys.
That's great. There's a lot of work that goes into keeping people safe this time of year. So what's your estimate on when you're going to start picking something?
Yeah, harvest. You know, it all depends on the weather, and it's fun to be out there, to be tasting with my brother, tasting with my dad, constantly tasting and evaluating things. I'd expect the next couple of weeks, you know, maybe the first or second week of September to get started. And then, like Dan alluded to, harvest rolls on for a while. It's a good 5 to 6 weeks. And, you know, we're constantly out there. The majority of wines you're trying today are hand harvested. You know, we pick our grapes by hand in the middle of the night. And it's remarkable to think about the amount of attention and time that goes into that. And you see that in many locations in the appellation. So I bet, you know, the first or second week of September we get started, and we'll be going until the end of October.
Sounds pretty typical from what we usually see, huh? That's great. Does anybody have any questions for Mark? Please feel free to speak up.
Yeah, Mark, I've got a question. I'm curious, when was the last challenging vintage that you had, and you know what makes it challenging out there weather-wise?
Yeah, challenging vintages is a great question. My dad likes to say in the Santa Lucia Highlands.
Sorry, Mark.
Sorry about that. You got me, Gwen. You know, my dad loves to say every vintage is the vintage of the century in the Santa Lucia Highlands, which is joking. But, you know, we're blessed to have a very mild climate. And I think back, you know, to the 2011 vintage, which for us is a very late vintage. Is a light vintage as well. And also we got some rain in that vintage. And I remember going through with our team, no joke, cluster by cluster, dropping fruit on the ground and dropping part of clusters on the ground to ensure only the most pristine, immaculate fruit went into the bin. I mean, yields were tragic. I mean, they were like a quarter of what they normally were, but we harvested was good. And I think about things like the 2011 vintage is a tough vintage. And these vintages are kind of like memories. You know, I think back about different things that happened in these vintages. And it's a fun reflection anyways for me when I'm drinking the wines.
Anybody else? Any other questions?
I got a question.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
My question's really quick. Like, Mark, did you ever want to be anything other than a farmer? Did you try not to be in the family business? Is there something else you wanted to do?
Yeah, you know, a great question. As a kid growing up in a farming community, we get thrown onto the ranches and we get started working as a young age. I have 2 kids, an 11-year-old and 9-year-old, and we actually have them working out on the ranch as well now. So I think it's great to teach them working. When I went through college, I wanted to be a professor. So when I was getting my master's degree, I thought a life of academia was good. After a couple years of that program, I realized quickly, I'm not an academic. I'm a farm kid. I belong on the ranch. I want to be on the ranch. I want to be turning off pumps at nighttime, you know, helping catch gophers, fixing tractors, and doing random stuff like that, and not be in a classroom. So yeah, cool. I mean, I love it. And as you can tell, I'm pretty enthusiastic. I love
I can tell.
Yeah, I mean, I love talking about farming, and people really, my wife jokes that she said, hey, farming's kind of cool now, and people care about their food. They care about where it comes from in their wines. And I think that's really important. And anything that brings more attention to people's wine and food is what we should be doing.
Thank you.
Question. So, Mark, are we still on?
Yes, we are, Dan.
Okay. So you forgot to mention your mom's a school teacher. So yeah. But I heard a rumor that half your labor force is sommeliers and wine writers. Is that true?
No, we do not. But if any wine writers or sommeliers or anyone, and we encourage people just to come out and visit what's going on. And I mean, I like showing people around the ranch. I like getting people to work, and I like getting their hands dirty. I mean, I'm fortunate that I get to live and work in a gorgeous place. Like you saw those slides that go in. I mean, that's real. It really looks like
coming. We are coming now. You have like opened the floodgates. We are coming.
Cool.
We're coming.
And you know, I'm not the only one in this appellation. There's so many growers like me that love sharing what we're doing and love, you know, not just our wines, but how we're taking care of the ranch, the way we're farming, the way we're taking care of our team. I mean, it's what we feel like we're doing things right here and the way things should be doing it. And we want to share that with people and encourage other people to do the same thing in other areas.
Your passion is infectious, Mark. Thank you for that. Okay, so I'm going to turn it back to Dan. So next year in 2022 are, you know, kind of the 30th anniversary of this AVA. And right as I started, the organization had gone through a sort of complete study to really affirm its borders. Dan was the head of that committee that included growers and experts of all kinds. And I wanted to just turn it over to him to give a quick update because we might be hearing some news next year.
Yeah. You know, real briefly, our Double L ranch is up at the northern end of the SLH. And so when I was president of the SLH group, I brought to the board the fact that there was some property that was in the SLH borders that really shouldn't be in our appellation. They were more river bottom type soils and not hillsides and like everything else within the SLH. And conversely, there was a little bit of property down at the south end that probably should have been in the SLH. So we formed a border committee, and we hired a specialist in appellation to write a petition to the government to amend our borders a little bit, and amend in the fact that we're taking a lot of acres out of the SLH and adding, maybe a little bit in at the south end. We in the desire here was just, we have a very tight, great appellation. With this application, which is in the review process right now, is actually the TTB has taken it under consideration and is out for in a comment period right now, where people can write comments into the government saying, yes, this is good or bad, we don't like this or whatever. So we're very close to this, but the desire was to tighten our borders up to SLH and make it even a greater appellation than it is now. So in a nutshell, that's it.
So this just went to the published comment period for the next almost, not quite 60 days. And then they tell us it's going to be another 9 to 12 months. So it's just an example also of how unbelievably long the process of applying and actually achieving appellation status. It's quite kind of mind-blowing, actually.
Yeah, I mean, we submitted the application over 2 years ago, and it's part of it was the slowdown in government and the administration change, but it's just very little, but it's just how the federal government sometimes works, and so especially the TTB in this instance slows molasses.
Yep. Okay, if I want to make sure we get all of our wonderful vintners in here that are joining us on the call. And so what we're going to do is have an opportunity for people to tell you a little bit about the wines that they shipped you. And they're also going to talk a little bit about the SLH and why they're here. As you can see, there's so many members of our organization that are wineries based up in Napa and Sonoma, where many of us here are coming from on today's meeting. They come to the SLH because they know and believe in the quality of the fruit here. And there's some really wonderful people here that can explain to you why they make wine in the SLH. They've also made wine in Oregon and Russian River and Sonoma Coast and Santa Rita. And so there's some great resources here that can really help explain why SLH. So Mark, why don't you start? You actually are the first one, and you're kicking off with the Chardonnays that you shipped out.
Yeah, Chardonnays. So again, Mark Pizzoni, the farmer of our family. My brother Jeff is our winemaker, extremely talented winemaker. We're best friends. I talk to him all the time. And my father, Dad, is the one who first got started for us years ago. We shipped out 2 bottles of wine. The first one is called Luli. It's a brand that we're partners with a woman named Sarah Floyd. Sarah's a master sommelier, a very talented woman, and we've been partnered with her on this project for a number of years. This is our Luli Chardonnay, 2017, we said. It is grapes. So these are not estate fruit. These are grapes that we purchased from neighbors, and that we hand harvest this, and my brother makes it. Really, it's a non-ML Chardonnay, really crisp, really bright, really vibrant, at a fantastic price point at around $20, which is pretty exciting to do. So that's our first one, the Luli Chardonnay. And then I have one other wine, which is our 2018 Lucia Sobranis Chardonnay. Sobranis is a vineyard that our family owns with Gary Franchione and his family. It's right in the middle of the appellation. Really extremely rocky site, really well-drained site. This wine is extremely mineral driven. I kind of get like a Meyer lemon thing going on it. And what I love about this wine, it's got this acidity and this energy, but it also has texture, tremendous texture and tremendous length. This is a full ML Chardonnay, all native yeast, primary and secondary fermentation, and aged in French oak barrels. It's got great length, and I love the Chardonnay. It comes from an old Wente clone of Chardonnay as well. And I actually brought a cluster of grapes. I don't know how many of you gotten to see, as the farmer, I got to bring part of the farm to the tour. I don't know if you guys can see this on the phone, but how many of you ever been out in vineyards? Actually, look at these, the Chardonnay grape cluster, totally different than the grape clusters you see in a grocery store. Little tiny berries, and this is an Old Fuente, which is loaded with flavor, really intense, a lot of natural acidity also. I think the Chardonnays from this appellation, they're very mineral driven. You have great energy, great acidity, and a lot of that comes from the granite based in our soils. And you have that texture. So yeah, 2 wines, love sharing them. Chardonnay, I'm a big fan of Chardonnay. It doesn't get as much attention as the Pinot Noir does, because the Pinot Noir gets so much attention in our area. And it's cool to be teamed up with my brother, my dad, in making these wines.
Very good. Any questions for Mark?
Mark, how's your dad doing?
Dad is good. Many of you know my father. He is full of energy, loves life, loves sharing. Wine has been such a huge part of his life, and loves sharing it with people. He's doing well. He's around. He checks in all the time, spends a ton of time out in the vineyard, shooting birds and running around the ranch. He checks in with Jeff and I all the time and says, hey, kids, I want to make sure you're making the very best wine you can from these ranches, which is cool.
Awesome. Great. Glad to hear that.
All right. Dan, you're going to tell us about your Riesling.
Yeah, we figured that you know, there's going to be a lot of Chardonnays and Pinot Noirs sent out, so we decided to you know, highlight our 1 acre of Riesling that we have on our Double L vineyard. First of all, our Double L vineyard is organically farmed. It was certified organic, and so this is organic fruit here. And what we had about 3 or 4 acres that I'd held aside and didn't plant for a while, thinking of doing another project there with wastewater and stuff like that. And then that didn't happen. So all of a sudden, about 12 years ago, I decided to plant this 3 acres. And so I went around the whole team and said, hey, what do you want to plant? There was a couple new clones of Pinot Noir that we hadn't had. There was a 943 was brand new. We decided to do an acre of that. We didn't have any Swan Pinot Noir on the vineyard, so we did an acre of that. But that 3rd acre, we kind of talked and said, let's do something a little bit different. Let's highlight a grape that should do really well in the Santa Lucia Highlands. And there's a fair amount of Riesling planted through the SLH, but it's really old clones from 40 years ago, unknown clones, and kind of just farmed for the bigger blending type things, and not really paid too much attention to like our Pinots and Chardonnays are. So we decided, I did a lot of research in German literature, and I picked 2 clones that had the most petrol-y kind of characteristic, because what I like in Rieslings is that crisp acidity and those petrol, diesel, I know those are terrible descriptors, but those who know Riesling and know that characteristic, what I'm talking about, they love it. And so we have a half acre of these 2 different clones, 239, 197 is those numbers. And so we're just doing, the best, and we're really happy. Unfortunately, this is our current release just came out, because our Rieslings have been selling very quickly, much to everybody's surprise. And so this is a new release, and so it's going to be more fruit driven right now. But if you could age it for a year, what we found that over when a Riesling ages, when it gets 1, 2, 3 years old, those petrol-y kind of characteristics start coming out in full force then. But anyway, that's what we selected. Hope you all enjoy it.
Very good. Does anybody have a question for Dan? Okay, then we're going to go to Ben from Talbot. He's going to tell us a little bit about Sleepy Hollow Vineyard and the wonderful Chardonnay that they make.
Hello, everybody. I'm Ben. I'm the brand ambassador for Talbot, and I'm actually originally from Florida and went to college in New York. So it's kind of cool to see some of my old stomping grounds on the call. But enjoy the Sleepy Hollow Chardonnay. So this is our 2017. It's hand-picked and whole cluster pressed. We ferment the entirety of this bottling. We actually have a new label, so it's got a little bit more of a slate kind of color on it. But we ferment it in French oak, and then it's aged in French oak for about 10 months. Of those barrels, 40% are new, so you get a lot of the kind of, you know, brown spice characteristics, vanilla, nutmeg, a lot of tree fruit. It's just a really wonderful, full-bodied, round Chardonnay. I didn't bring a cluster from the vineyard, but I did bring a soil sample. So people love to see the loam soil that we've got from the vineyard. We actually share a fence line with Dan's Vineyard, Morgan L. So we're at the very northern tip of the Santa Lucia Highlands. It's funny, I was flying out of San Francisco. I normally travel a lot for work, and I think at TSA they thought this was explosives because they detained me and like barely let me on the plane. And I was on my way to Florida, and the lady I sat next to said to get it back to California, tell them it's your grandma's ashes. So it was a little dark, but I just check it now. I make sure to check it. But the Talbot family have been in Monterey for a long time. They actually had a menswear clothing shop in Carmel, and they would sell super high-end men's neckties like this one. They're like $200 ties. And the family would go to Europe in order to source silk for their ties. And while they were over there in the 70s, they fell in love with wine. Started the winery in 1982, and were initially buying fruit from Sleepy Hollow. So one of the cool things about Sleepy Hollow is it was planted in 1972. So as Gwen mentioned, the AVA started in 1991. So the vineyard predates the AVA by 20 years. Initially, we were just sourcing fruit from there. And in 1994, the Talbot family were able to purchase Sleepy Hollow outright and build the winery in the middle of it, which is when we became an estate winery. And Sleepy Hollow is roughly half Chardonnay and half Pinot Noir. It's 500 acres, roughly, depending on when we're replanting. And it's just gotten some really great accolades. It's a fantastic wine. I love it on a hot summer day like today in California, and I hope you enjoy it too.
Thank you, Ben. I think it's such an exciting thing to see Sleepy Hollow. You guys are doing a lot of replanting right now, and talking with David Coventry, your winemaker, about the wines he's got in barrel. He just is so excited, and he's really, really so excited about the future of Talbot, and it's very cool to see. So thank you for the update, Ben. Okay, so let's keep moving. We've got Kristen McIntyre, daughter of Steve Mack, who has, unfortunately, we lost him and somehow can't get him back. But Kristen, I think you're on here still.
Yes, I am, and I had to jet outside here for just a second. I'm so sorry about losing Steve on the call. It has to be an internet issue, of course, that we've probably all faced in the last 10 months. But hi, everybody. I'm Kristen, and I run the direct-to-consumer primarily program for McIntyre. I am the second generation in business, and so my father started this in the mid to late 80s, just before I was born, and he purchased the property in the Santa Lucia Highlands from the McFarland family, so had some original plantings of Pinot, own-rooted old vine Pinot that we produce from today. So the wine that we sent you is our 2017 Estate Pinot Noir, and that is the base of that is from our old vine block. So again, it's been planted more than 4 decades ago. It's some of the oldest Pinot in the Santa Lucia Highland region, which is very special. And if you have ever been able to see it in person, I do invite you out to the vineyard soon. But if you've ever seen it in person, it's gnarly. It looks beautiful. It's, kind of a scary majestic. But the base of that wine brings out a lot of minerality and earthy characteristics that's typical of the Santa Lucia Highlands. And also that nice, lush, peppery back-end flavor on the palate is something that I just love. It, for me, really encapsulates the maritime climate that we share with all the other wine artisans in the area. And it represents itself very well as a drinkable wine now, but also something that can be cellared for up to 10 years and absolutely beautiful, graceful with age. One part about my business that I love is running the events and getting to sit alongside Gwen on the board of the SLH, learn from her marketing expertise. And we are now building out a vineyard location or a hospitality location out of the vineyard. So I'm extremely excited that now that we have to social distance, we can go and play outside still in the vineyard. So that being said, I'm looking forward to sharing this 2017 Estate Pinot with you. It has not been released to the public just yet, so you are getting a sneak peek. Only our wine club members have had it, which is wonderful. It did get a recent score from the Wine Enthusiast for 92 points. And again, like I said, it is something that benefits from age. I'd like to say that our winemaker, Byron Kasugi, he works very closely and emulates our family values very well, in that he will create products that are traditional, that are classic, that are ageable, that are, you know, can withstand a lot of pressure, a lot of changes, and it still comes out on top. That's one thing that I know I've learned from him. And then getting back to what my father wasn't able to share yet was the generational, I know that Mark had talked about it, but the generational aspect of farming. My late grandfather started managing citrus in Southern California, and that's where my father learned how to work with the hands. And then he went to school at Fresno State to major in viticulture and enology. So double major to get the best of both worlds. And landed here with his high school sweetheart, my mother, in the Santa Lucia Highlands. Started the vineyard management company that he manages, about 13,000 acres, and really just jumped from there. And echoing what Mark was saying about having those multi-generational people in the area, they all work together. You see them on the road, just in the middle of the road with their coffee or whatever drink they have choice in the morning, and asking questions and just filling details and sharing things. That's been really, really wonderful. So that being said, it's amazing to see that aspect in the vineyard, the timelessness of the families and the wine as they come together. So I really hope that you all enjoy your shipments, and I look forward to any other questions that you may have. Like I said, I run the direct-to-consumer, but I'm also the social media gal. So reach out at any time, and I would love to share even more.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristen. We're all so excited to see how the build out of everything comes along at the vineyard there. Okay, let's move on. We now have Nick Franchione. Adam appeared earlier, but I think I just saw Nick. Oh no, there's Adam. Okay. I thought I saw Nick.
Adam was prepared to speak. I might be able to join in a little bit.
Okay, we got Adam and Nick anyway.
Hi, well, yes, I'm Adam Franchione, and I'm fourth generation farmer. My brother and I are both fourth generation farmer here at Roar Wines. And so Roar Wines, my dad started in 2001, but he started farming vineyards in 1996 was our first planting, which was Rosella's vineyard. And so kind of a little bit about our family history, kind of mirrors a little bit what Mark was mentioning. Our family came from Switzerland in the late 1800s here to California, and they started off in dairy as well. And then eventually my grandfather moved over into row crops, and my dad came back in the 70s, late 70s to help him with that, and eventually moved over into vineyards and citrus. And so I think it's one of the unique parts about this appellation is we really are farmers at heart, and we're not really, you go to Sonoma or Napa, and those are great wines, but you see a lot of corporations up there, where down here in Monterey County, you see a lot of farmers, and we like to farm everything. So we still continue to farm lemons and avocados, and you see a lot of farmers who also do row crops as well as vineyards. So really farming is in our blood, but it's great to see that our passions are really about growing the type of crops and stuff that we like to grow and stuff that we like to consume, whether that's lettuce or wine or what have you. So Our family farms 4 vineyards in the Santa Lucia Highlands, Sierra Mar and Rosella's Vineyard. Sierra Mar is a vineyard that we planted in 2008, and as I mentioned, Rosella's was planted in 1996. That was named after my mother, Rosella. And we farm 2 vineyards with the Pizzoni family, which are Sobranis Vineyard and Gary's Vineyard. So of these 4 vineyards, we pretty much farm in the southern part of the appellation and the northern part of the appellation. And you get a lot of different textures and flavors from these 2 parts of the appellation. The southern tends to be higher up in the mountains. You have higher elevation. You can sit above the fog lines, so you get a little bit more sun exposure and maybe 5 to 10 degrees warmer during the growing season. And in the north, you're sitting at lower elevations, probably at about, Rosella's, for example, is at 400 feet elevation. And so we get a lot of fog coverage. And so therefore, we tend to start our harvests in the south part of the appellation where it's warmer, and then move our way up north where it's cooler and you're closer to the bay. So the wine that I believe is being shipped out to you is the 2018 Rosella's Vineyard Pinot Noir. And 2018 to me was just an absolutely stellar vintage for us. We started our Pinot harvest on September 15th and ended Pinot on October 6th, and we ended our Syrah harvest. That the very last bit of harvest that we pick is Syrah, and that was on October 31st. But 18 was just a picture perfect growing season. There was really no weather issues to contend with, and the biggest challenge at making wine is weather dictating when you can pick. And 2018 was a great vintage in that you really got to pick on what your flavor, whatever you consider to be ripe, whether that's chemically looking at acids or bricks, or whether it's just flavor profile. It really was winemaker's heaven as far as choosing when to pick, and really just a nice, easy harvest to kind of go through. So yeah, that's a little bit about us. We're a small winery. We're about 5,000 cases. We make 5 varietals: Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, Syrah, Grenache, and Viognier. And the Syrah, the Pinot Noir and Chardonnay are stuff that tends to get go through distribution, and so stuff like Syrah, Grenache, and Viognier, we make such small amounts of. We're talking like 2 to 3 barrels for each varietal that pretty much goes direct to consumer. So yeah. Anything else you want to add, Nick?
Yeah. The only other thing that I would add to it is, Rosella's is more or less our flagship for Pinot Noir. As I mentioned, there's a host of different varietals that we do produce, but Pinot Noir being the biggest one, and Rosella's being the flagship. It's a historic piece of land for us where everything got started. Parents live there, and I grew up there. Killed my first rabbit there, which I cried shortly afterwards. So there's a lot of wonderful things going on about that piece of property that is very much home for Adam and myself. And I do think that Rosella's Pinot Noir perfectly embodies our brand Roar. Roar is, people ask, what is Roar about? And Roar is just an excitement, it's a celebration, and there's pride and energy with that word, and that's what we really, really love about it. A lion has power and finesse and beauty, and that's exactly what Rosella's Pinot Noir is really all about. You use some incredible aromatics, wonderful rose petals, some beautiful bouquet to that. And then you have on the palate, it's very alluring and got very complex features with a beautiful long finish to it. And there's just, again, 2018 was a fantastic version of that, as Adam mentioned. Across the board, I think a lot of 18s are pretty incredible, but this is a great example of that. I know we haven't shipped it out yet, but we will do that soon, and I'm excited for you all to try it.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. We'll hold questions till we're done with everybody so we can get the last 4 folks up here. So I'm going to turn it over now to Kara Overstreet with Brillium.
Hey everybody, I just want to start by saying thank you for being here and being patient. I know there's lots of virtual events, so thank you for choosing ours today. So that's great. Okay. Massive cherry berry lilac roasted nose that you can smell across the room, bursting with fruit. Classy and tight with Bing cherries and blackberries. Serious wine layered with tobacco and cedar, vanilla and spices, a rich mouth-coating splendor. So some of you guys might recognize that beautiful, evocative writing coming from Dottie Gator. Her description of Pinot Noir from Gary's Vineyard stole my heart long before I was a winemaker. That column comes from 2003. And after I read her and John's article, I bought that wine, and it changed my professional career arc. So I'm Kareth Overstreet. I am the winemaker, the chief tank shoveler, and CEO at Bruliam Wines. But I was not always a winemaker. So I was not a farmer growing up. When I grew up, my dad said, you can be whatever you want after medical school. And I held up my end of the deal. After completing medical school and internship, residency, and 2 fellowships, I decided I wanted to be a winemaker. So I went back to UC Davis, took some enology classes, and started in time for the 2008 harvest. And in that inaugural vintage, I made 1 barrel of wine from Santa Lucia Highlands. Since then, I've grown significantly, and now I cherry pick my fruit from all the best growers in California. And I am delighted that I get to work with Mark and the Garys and the Sobranis Vineyard fruit. And I consider my luck to be extraordinary. Bruliam is named for my kids, Bruno, Lily, Amelia. And Bruliam sounds like cadmium or polonium. So of course our logo is a riff on the periodic table of elements and a cheeky nod to my past career in medical science. I love the people of Santa Lucia Highlands, and their story, like mine, is one of grit and persistence and ultimately a leap of faith. You've probably all heard the legend about Gary Pizzoni planting grapes after a bumper crop of celery. He took a leap of faith, and that's what Mark Pizzoni did with me. So in 2009, I picked up the phone and I cold called Mark. Of course, I remembered Dottie's article, and I remembered that bottle of wine in the Wall Street Journal. So I called up Mark and I said, hey, do you have any of that Gary's fruit that you can sell to me? And he didn't know who I was. He didn't know me from either of the other 2 Adams who are on this Zoom call. But instead of laughing at me or hanging up the phone, he took a leap of faith with me. I'd only been making wine for 2 years. He invited the family down to the ranch in 2009. And then in 2010, he sold me my inaugural crop from Santa Lucia Highlands from the Sobranis Vineyard. And that year, he sold me 0.76 tons of fruit, and I couldn't have been more excited. And the day of harvest, as that big refrigerated truck was rambling up the 101 on its way to Healdsburg, Mark called me, and he said, Kareth, take good care of that fruit. And ever since then, my SLH harvest can't start until Mark calls me and says those words, take good care of that fruit, which goes to show you, even with a medical degree, sometimes magic trumps science. And that's all. Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thank you, Kareth. Okay, so now we've got Adam Lee. Adam is let's call him a veteran of the SLH. He's got a lot of history and a lot of information as well.
The older Adam on this phone call. So I sent you all samples out and had a chance to email and converse with a number of you of my new wine called Clarice Wine Company. But I am a veteran of the SLH. I started buying grapes when I was the winemaker and owner of Siduri Wines. Some of you may be familiar with that. And I started buying grapes from the area in 1997 from Gary Pizzoni. And then I started getting fruit from the Gary's Vineyard in 1999, the Rosella's Vineyard in 2001. I was at the first vintages at Sobranis and Sierra Mar. So I have purchased and been fortunate to purchase grapes from up and down the area, both at Siduri and now at Clarice. And actually that is kind of the most important thing that I'm going to say. When with Siduri, I brought all this fruit in the SLH, but I also brought fruit down in the Santa Rita Hills in Santa Barbara, Russian River, Sonoma Coast, and all the way up to the Willamette Valley. When I started my own winery, I had an opportunity to get fruit from any of these places. Any place I could choose, I could have gone there and gotten fruit, and I chose to go to the SLH. because to me, it is the most extraordinary place, quite frankly, to grow Pinot Noir. It's the place that I wanted the wine, my new venture, to come from. There are a number of reasons for that. They've all been touched on by many people here. But one thing I wanted to do, we're kind of in a warm spell right now. I've been sitting here watching the temperature on my phone, and it has gone up here as it gets closer to 4 o'clock. It's gone up here in Sonoma County, which is where I live. It's gone up by about 4 degrees, while it's gone down in the Santa Lucia Highlands by about 4 degrees. And that is because of something unique. It's the fact that the warmer Central Valley heats up and it pulls in all of that cold air and wind off the Monterey Bay. And so the hottest part of the day oftentimes is at 1 p.m. or so. And that wind comes in, it gives you skins that have some thickness to them, concentrated flavors, but it really extends the hang time. There is not a region that I get fruit from that has a longer hang time than the Santa Lucia Highlands. From when the vines first start to come out, sometimes in February, early March, to harvest in mid-September, it is just a long, long time that the fruit hangs on the vines, a long time for flavors to develop, for complexity to come about. So what I brought was sent to you all, was the 2018 Rosella's Vineyard. As Adam mentioned, 18 is a gorgeous, gorgeous year. He's completely right. You could have picked on Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday. It really didn't particularly matter in 18 because the weather was so mild. You could choose any day you wanted to pick. I am doing a few different things with Clarice than I've done before. I'm taking 2 disparate sections in the vineyards. I do a Rosella's and a Gary's, 2 disparate sections, and I sample them as if they were one, pick them together. So some of the things are more ripe and some of the things are less ripe, but it's an interesting combination of the two. I do a lot of whole cluster on this, which is unusual for me. I didn't really do that much at Siduri. These wines this is 80% whole cluster, and I don't do any, or have not had to do any additions. So there's no yeast added. I haven't had to do any kinds of additions other than sulfur at the end to bottle, and that's it. So they're made about as naturally as any wine I've ever made. So I hope you enjoy it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Adam. Now on a slightly different spectrum, we've got 2 awesome winemakers, 2 wonderful women who are also very experienced with Syrah in the SLH, which is something that a lot of people are kind of really getting hot on. And so I want to introduce Bibiana, and she can talk to you a little bit about Syrah and the SLH and her Cattleya project.
Thank you, Gwen. Hello, everybody. I'm Bibiana. I think my accent and my last name tells you all that I am not born and raised in the United States. I actually was born in Medellin, Colombia, a very, very known city around the globe. And I really grew up in the most challenging times of my country, I could say. But I wanted to make wine since I was 14. So I started telling people I want to make wine out of the blue. I have never seen a vineyard before, and I didn't know what to make wine meant. So I wasn't like Mark and Jeff that grew up on the farm and were stomping on grapes when they were 3 years old. I went to France. I studied winemaking in France. So I went to a school in Cognac where I got my degree of viticulture and enology. And then I went to the University of Bordeaux where I graduated. And during that time, I made wine in France a little bit all over. So I was a big fan of Côte Rôtie. My first experience really making wine was with 2 vintners in Côte Rôtie. And then I went to Alsace, Burgundy, Bordeaux, and Cognac. But I always was very, very inspired by making great Syrah wines until I came to the United States, and everybody would tell me that consumers would not drink Syrah in the United States. And I was just completely surprised by it because I didn't understand the Syrah that people was consuming in California. I am actually married to Mark's brother, Jeff. And I met Jeff back in 2005 when I was working for a small family-owned winery in Sonoma County. And they also make Syrah, and Jeff was making already one of you know, their 3 Syrahs. And I was very familiar with Syrah in Sonoma County, but not so much on Syrah from Santa Lucia Highlands. In 2011, I started my own label, and I only made 1 barrel, and it was a Soberane single vineyard Syrah. And one of the things that I want to talk about in regards to Santa Lucia Highlands is number 1, and all of these farmers that do it every day didn't talk about it, but I don't know if all vineyards are sustainable certified, but I know that all the vineyards that Mark farms with the Franchoni family as well are sustainable certified. And this has become something really important to Mark on everything that he does, that I really see through all their wines, but also on the fruit that I purchase. Every year I only get about 2 tons of Syrah. I have been getting the same 4 rows for 9 years now. And every year the vintage is really changing the style of the wine, but at the same time, you are always seeing this purity and this tension that you have on the wine because of the acidity that comes naturally on the fruit. Everybody got different vintages because I only make about 75 cases, and being part of the SLH farm group is a commitment to really support the appellation with what I do. So some of you go 2017, others go the 2015, which is the previous label. So this is our new label for Cattleya. This is the 2017, and I call it the initiation because it was my first ever wine made under my own proprietary label and business. The 2017 vintage was very different for me in regards to Sonoma and Napa than it was in the Highlands. We were affected by the first fires, and here in Napa and Sonoma, it was just very challenging compared to a very cool ripening season for the Syrah in Santa Lucia Highlands. So I love the vintage, I love the intensity. It's a wine that tends to be always very concentrated. I used 100% new oak. We only made 3 barrels of that. And a lot of the barrels are 5 years air dry oak. We do natural fermentation, 100% ML, and 15 months of aging in barrel. The 2015 was a very small vintage for us. So I think it's one of my smallest production. I might have done about 55 cases. So it's a wine that has a lot of tension, really beautiful, very concentrated as well, and much smaller crop than what we had in 2017. And Yolanda, if I'm pronouncing your name right, she got the only bottle of 2013 because that's what we had. And 13 for me is a vintage that had so much tannins that the wines are just right now starting to go. So I hope that, I mean, I know it's getting really late, but I would love to hear from you even personally, your opinion on the different vintages. I was hoping that we would be able to talk about it, but I know it's getting late for everybody too. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Viviana. So we'll get Sabrina in here, and then we'll open it up and people can talk and share some feelings and thoughts. So.
Okay, we have a little wide shot. You guys see us?
Yeah, you look good.
So we just unmuted.
Sabrina.
This is Seska Dent. I call her Jessica Dent today, but her name is Seska.
Have not.
She's our sales and marketing, and I always bring her along because she knows things that I don't know. We're going to talk to you today a little bit about I'm pretty sure you guys all got the 17 kW Syrah.
Yes.
And so I actually, in the good old days, I actually used to make 3 Syrahs. I made a Syrah from Doctor's Vineyard, which is owned by Han Estates on the Santa Lucia Highlands. That was actually the first SLH wine I ever made.
Oh,
and then I got hello. And then sorry, I thought I heard something else. And then I also produced a Syrah off of our property in the Monterey AVA, which is just below the Santa Lucia Highlands and sort of the more fertile soils of the river basin. I just wanted to, I'm going to probably say a few things that I love about SLH that Steve had mentioned and other people have mentioned already, which is I love that this valley is not a monoculture. It was really important to me when I actually decided as a young winemaker where I was going to sort of settle down and decide to make wine, because I took it very seriously, because I went back to wine after having a career in the film industry and the theater industry in San Francisco. I had a great job, a great union job in the film business, but I gave that up and went back to school. It's important for me to go back to school, and then I wound up in wine. And when you decide at an older age, after you've been through school twice or multiple times, is where you want to settle down. You want to settle down in a place that you kind of want to decide to retire in. And to me, it was really important that it wasn't a monoculture, that we do have lettuce, and that we do have, I think somebody mentioned 50 types of crops. I think that was Steve McIntyre, in this valley. And it's beautiful when you come down here, and when you guys do come down here and see it, you'll see what we're talking about. But just to get to the point, I really love the diversity of the culture here in terms of the crop. I love the diversity of culture here in terms of the people. I love the diversity of the culture here in terms of the grape crop. And so I do a variety of things in the Santa Lucia Highlands. I do a Chardonnay, a Pinot, and a Syrah. But we wanted to talk to you about this KW Syrah here. I'm going to show you the label. You see it? That's our label. And Kirk Williams is an amazing farmer. He farms a lot of acres up on the bench, and also has avocados and lemons, which is sort of what I was talking to you about in terms of it's not just all grapes. The one thing that I think Steve also talked about, everybody's hit on, is in this area, we do have the luxury of time as a winemaker, which I love, because it makes, I mean, I always say I walk a fine line between efficiency and laziness. And if you make my job easy, because I have the luxury of time when I want to pick the fruit, because we do not have a lot of weather pressure. I know somebody had mentioned, or Mark, I think, had mentioned something about, you know, what would difficult vintages be. I would say I've never, 2009 was tricky. We had a storm come up from the south, and that humidity, which is sort of what we're seeing right now in August, which doesn't really affect the grapes that much. But when we were seeing it, it was in October. So that's a real hallmark memory that I have here. But other than that, I mean, I've been here since 2004. That was kind of it. Like, it's been pretty good for me as a winemaker. So hard, you know. I do style, especially when you're picking from a variety of vineyards on the bench and off the bench as well. I hope you enjoyed this. I was going to have Seska just mention a few things about Rath in general, in terms of our property size. And
yeah, 72 acres total. We're 67 acres planted, and we are on the valley floor, so we are considered Monterey, right across the street from the SLH. In fact, Sabrina and I are looking at it right now.
Yes.
KW is this is actually one of my favorite wines that Sabrina makes. I think you get a lot of really nice minerality from it, some violets, black peppercorn, very lush as well. So,
and we get a lot of spice on this wine, and we get a lot of fruit and spice. So that's what I love about these cool climates. And I know Gwen had mentioned she wanted us to talk a little bit about the difference in the regions. The one thing I love about cool climate Syrah is that it has a lot more complexity than hot weather Syrah does. And I know that sounds arrogant and maybe a little dig at our southern friends in Paso Robles, but I don't mind. I actually like the sophistication, and that's the one thing I love about Doctor's Vineyard. That's the one thing I love about KW, and also what I love about the San Saba Vineyard Syrah. And the fact that we make three, you really get to see the difference in elevation. And then you also get to see how the spiciness comes out in a cool weather Syrah. You really get more complexity of flavor.
Awesome, ladies. Thank you so much. And I'm glad you mentioned that. I was going to mention that you're coming to us from the winery, which is down in the southern part of the AVA, right off of Foothill Road, just a hop, skip, and a jump from Han. So when all of you on this meeting join us down there, you will get to see. So, okay, I wanted to just quickly mention there's a couple other wines that you guys had been shipped that are not, that we don't have a representative here to talk about, but I just wanted to quickly mention. So the Scheid Vineyards 2017 Reserve Chardonnay from Ascol Vineyard. The Ascol Vineyard is the Caraccioli family. And so some of you know the Caraccioli brand as well. They make beautiful, beautiful sparkling wines from that vineyard, which is way up in the north in Gonzales, just after Gonzales River Road. You'll see a lot of new wines coming out with the Escol Vineyard label on them, so keep your eyes peeled for that. And we've talked about Gary's Vineyard and Minor Family Wines that's based up the Napa Valley. Produces a Gary's Vineyard, which they sent to you. So now at least you get to experience it yourself again if you haven't already. And then Sarah's Vineyard is actually a winery that's in Santa Clara County, so just kind of in the southern part of the Silicon Valley past there, and they sent over their Chandra Grapefield. Chandra Grapefield is, don't you love the name? Like, it's not Chandra Vineyard, it's Chandra Grapefield. And that comes from Joe and Penny Alarid, and Joe is also a vegetable farmer, and I think the story goes, somebody once called the vineyard a grape field, and so he kind of said that's kind of cool, it stuck. So so those wines are coming your way as well. And with that said, I think I just want to open it up to questions. You have all this these great resources here. You can type something in the chat, or you can just speak up and ask away. No questions.
I have a question for Adam. Adam, are you still on?
Which Adam?
Adam Lee.
Yes, I am. I'm here.
Hey, Adam.
Hey.
Hey, I want you to comment as it's something I've been seeing too about as the vine ages get older. It seems like flavor development and ripeness and desirable flavors are happening at a lot lower bricks these days. And can you comment on that, what you're seeing?
Yeah, I completely believe that's the case. You know, years and years ago, back when I met you in wine retail, I met Tom Rocchioli, and Tom Rocchioli told me that with young vines, you take things riper because what you can't really get in complexity, you make up for in just big, effusive, forward fruit flavors. And I know that when I started in the SLH, I mean, you've been in the area far longer than I have, but so many of the plantings were new. I mean, there was this big explosion in new Pinot Noir plantings, and we were dealing with very, very young vines. And I think we were taking things riper because that was the right thing to do at the time. I do think now, as the vines have gotten older, the roots have gotten deeper, that you are seeing both riper flavors at lower bricks, but also just more complexity in the wines. And so I certainly, with the Clary stuff, am picking a little bit less ripe. One of the things that often happens in the Santa Lucia Highlands, as you know, is that we end up with very good levels of acid. And sometimes we have to wait longer to pick. Part of the reason for me doing some whole cluster on this is if I'm picking a little bit earlier, the acid's very, very high, but this the stems end up lowering the strength of the acid a bit. And so consequently, it helps balance it out. But that's the kind of things, ripe stems like that, you wouldn't have gotten on young vines back in the past. So no, I think that the age of these vineyards is really helping and making more interesting, more complex wines now.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm seeing the same thing.
Yeah. So somebody asked about the fires, I think, got back on that, but there is one fire, I guess, that's kind of north of the area, but it's not, fortunately, affecting anything in the Santa Lucia Highlands right now. So.
Gwen, I have a question for you from a marketing standpoint. Is there a message that you're trying to deliver about the wines to the consumers? What is, what is sort of the overall message that you'd like consumers to understand or to know?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think for us, there's if I were to say kind of the three messages, one is, we are a small AVA that's in a very special and very unique place, made up of wonderful people, family farming people, right, with this great history of farming, and they really, really care about what they're doing and what they're growing. because it's such a small area too, it has, you know, there's kind of something about it. There's not a lot of new land that could be planted. So, you know, these 4950 vineyards that we have, it's close to what it's only going to be. And so that makes it, you know, a little more rare, a little more special. And the other thing I'll say is something that I hear a lot when I taste consumers and am out pouring at events is the wines, because of this region, because of that wind that comes in and cools it off, but also it helps strengthen the carbon in the grapes and thicken the skins. It makes wines that are so flavorful, but also really delicious. That cool climate keeps the grapes from being overripe, but you have really intense flavors with this delicious acidity that comes and keeps them fresh and vibrant. And that's what I hear so many people say to me is like, I love these wines because they're so delicious. They're rich, but they're not heavy. They're fresh. They're not jammy. They're just, you know, ripe, but still really fresh and vibrant. And I think that is something that sets this area apart. And then, you know, the last thing I think is that it's so unique in that so many of our wines are vineyard designated. So you see producers from the North Bay, from Sonoma, from Paso, from other regions that specifically come to the Santa Lucia Highlands, and they do so for their high-end wine programs. They come because they want to make a wine from Double L or from Gary's Vineyard or from Rosella's Vineyard, because these vineyards have a track record of quality and consistency. And so that's something that's also really, really unique. It is such an appellation that is driven by vineyard designated wines that I think is interesting and different. Oh, someone asked a question about the mission grapes. So it was the 1790s that there were some grapes planted at the Soledad Mission, which is just a little on the valley floor just outside of the AVA, Alyssa, and you can still go there and see some really old gnarly vines, right?
Yeah.
Oh, you did? Okay, yeah.
And then, so then they planted the Pinot and the Chardonnay in the 70s. Was that the first time they planted anything but Mission?
Oh, no.
No.
Mission was not planted in the SLH,
Okay,
but
sorry, that's a misread the slide.
yeah, Monterey County had been planted earlier, but the SLH, the first grapes were in the early 70s.
SLH was early 70s. Right. Okay, then that was great.
Yeah. What else? Any thoughts, or what kind of impressions do you guys have from the Santa Lucia wines and from the wines that you've been able to taste and sample?
Well, I've enjoyed SLH wines for a long time, and I think in all, I live in the Russian River Valley, but I love Gary's Vineyards, and I think I'll choose SLH Pinot Noir over everybody else. So, and that's been my opinion for a while.
Good deal.
Sounds of that.
Yeah. I think we're kind of blessed in being one of the areas in the whole world that can grow really good quality Pinot Noir. And we feel very fortunate because of that.
Yeah, I have not made it through the wines. I didn't want to cheat. I thought if I started early, I was going to cheat. So I will make it through, and I will share my opinions.
Yeah, thank you. I think,
thank you for the homework.
Absolutely. We really were hoping to have the chance to, impart some information and give you access to talk to all these people without making it a formal tasting. So first of all, I know we sent a lot of wines, but I think it also gives you the opportunity to enjoy them on your own time, enjoy them with food in different settings that help you just start to get a feel for, oh, now I see, I can kind of get this thread of what this appellation is telling me through the wines.
Yeah, it's always great to meet the people behind the wine. I mean, the wines can be delicious, but when you meet the people, they're even more delicious. So this was fabulous.
Well, we're so glad that you all joined us. If I understand that, you know, it's getting a little late, so some of you are probably anxious to clock off, so please go right ahead. We've really enjoyed having you. If anybody else wants to continue to chat, I know that some of our vintners will probably hang out and be happy to answer some questions. So thank you all for joining us. Again, we really truly want you to come visit, and can't wait to hope make that happen someday. So thank you all for all your time.
Thank you.
Good to see
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. This was amazing.
Thanks for joining, Brian.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. This has been great.
Take care. Come by anytime, guys. We're here.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Gwen, for organizing it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gwen. Great job.
My pleasure. So nice to get to connect with all of you that I haven't seen face to face in a long time.
I know. All right, I gotta go run and do swim carpool. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Kara. Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Julia. Thanks, James. Great to have you guys on.
Thanks all. Bye-bye. Have a good evening.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye, guys. Thanks, Dan. I'm bummed we missed Steve. I'm not sure what happened, but he couldn't get back in. So I'll have to go and look at what I've done, since you had a time getting in too, huh?
He may have been a victim of the rolling, blackouts or something, So yeah, that was really unfortunate. But yeah, that's why I came back from the vineyard, because the internet at my house is so much better than down at the vineyard. So for really critical meetings, I come back and do it from here. So it's just sorry I couldn't get on. I've never had to enter a password and a screen name before joining Zoom, so it threw me for a loop, and it's like scrambling.
I'm gonna go work on all this so that doesn't happen again tomorrow. But thank you for everything. It was great to talk to you, and we'll see you back here tomorrow. I have a slight change to the agenda because Gary's gonna join, so I'll send that over to take a look at also. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good.
All right.
All right.
Thank you guys.
Good night.
Good night.